Thank you for joining me today for a walk in the garden. It's early September and you're watching one of a series of garden shows on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable TV. I'm Liz Davey and the shows are filmed here in my garden. We go through the gardening year with garden tasks that need to be done, things that are ready to harvest, and then we find out what we can do with those things that we harvest. I'm here in my herb garden this morning and it is early September and fall is definitely in the air. The leaves have started to fall a little bit here and there, and we've just been through a dry spell which ended yesterday with an inch of rain. So things are a little wet here this morning, but it was a welcome rain because things were getting very dry and watering is limited in many sections of my yard. And it does get dry. And the herb garden's one of those places. Herbs tend to like things a little dry, but not extremely so. They want it well drained at any rate. Right now, a lot of the herbs have just bloomed or are starting to go to seed. And anything that's gone, it's definitely okay to just cut those back, start cutting things back. If they have really good seed pods, you might want to leave those for the birds because they do like some of the seeds. But others that don't make good seed pods, it's all right to cut them to the ground. There are a few things, however, that you want to leave until next spring. And that would be the southern wood, which is and the rue. Both of those will stay somewhat green all winter and do best if they're pruned in the spring. The rose is the same way. I have a couple roses in here. They will wait. Certainly sage, you can continue to use that sage pretty much all winter as long as you can get in. Thymes don't need to be cut. Mints are okay to cut down once they turn brown because they'll come back up from the ground. This is a scented geranium, a peppermint geranium, and this one you can either dig and take in or take cuttings, and I chose to take cuttings of it, so I'll leave that here and remove it once it is died due to frost. The other thing that I want to take in, most of my herbs are hardy perennials or they're annuals that are easily replaced, like some basil. The calandulas, if I let them, will reseed. But I have a rosemary here, and rosemary is not quite hardy in our climate. So this is one I will dig, and I'm starting to dig my plants now to bring in the house so that they can acclimate a little bit to being in a pot while they can still stay outside. And I just dig around the outside of this, trying to get as much of the root of it as I can. There's a fairly deep root. And I'll put it into a new pot, and I will add fresh potting soil to this pot and then put it in a sunny place, probably near my back door, so I won't forget to bring it in. Rosemary can stay out in the garden until the temperatures at night are about 20 degrees. So it's one of the things that's semi-hardy, but it won't last when the temperatures go below 20 degrees. So it will take a freeze, but not a really prolonged period of cold. So that one's going to come in the house with me. Right now, I want to use as many as I can. I'm letting this one, the fennel, go to seed so that hopefully I'll have some fennel here next year. Fennel is kind of a biennial. This must be its second year. And it is going to seed, so we'll let it go to seed and see if we have some nice seedlings next spring. Lemon verbena I have in several places in the garden. It's an herb I really like. It makes wonderful tea, also good in iced tea, just as a sprig. Has a lovely lemon flavor. It's good chopped up in rice. It has a lot of uses. I'll dry some of that, but I have not ever been successful in taking cuttings and growing them on. I usually give it a try, but so far I have not yet succeeded in keeping one going in the house. So it's one that I'll have to buy again next year as a seedling. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's going on over there. Perennial garden's bright colors that were here just a few weeks ago are now gone, as our helianthus with its bright yellow blooms has now been deadheaded completely and will not bloom any further. I have a few potted plants in here with the nicotiana in it, and a few dried things are available, but we still have a few blooms to look forward to. The one in back is Boltonia, and it will be having white blooms. It's just starting to bloom right now. It looks like an aster, a fall aster, but it's actually a Boltonia, and it tends to stand very straight, but it has the lovely white blooms, and it will be covered within another week. I've left the seed pods on some of the things just because they provide a lot of food for the birds, and it's nice to have the birds in the garden because in addition to the seeds, they also eat the insects that might hurt the plants. This one's Eupatorium chocolate, and it's supplied its green, brown, or green and purplish dark foliage all summer to this corner of the garden, and now it's setting buds for white blooms, so it too will stand out with its white color in just another week or so. It has nice buds on it. The butterfly bush that's back here is mostly finished blooming. I keep deadheading it, and that encourages it to bloom. There's a grass in back, and the grasses are now coming into their own. I have several different grasses in the garden which add a lot of texture in the fall. This has a very light texture, but it also is very nice to pick for flower arrangements. The daylilies are finished, and they're looking really sad. I want to get down here and remove a lot of this old dead foliage. And this is a good time if you want to divide daylilies or other perennials, or move them to a new location, which I'm considering with this one, so that I can put something a little more colorful here, perhaps another chrysanthemum that would look nice. But these, once they get brown, you might just as well cut off all the old foliage. There were some lilies here as well that also, the foliage browned, and I was able to cut those off at ground level. They will be back next spring, but right now I have a hole here, so I would probably like to put a couple chrysanthemums in here next year. So I'll note that on my garden journal and order chrysanthemums in the spring. Simply because spring planted chrysanthemums tend to be perennial, whereas the ones you buy now, which are called hardy chrysanthemums, aren't. They seldom make it through the winter. They just don't have enough time to put down roots. They make a great decoration, and if I really wanted to add color, I could put one in, but I would not expect it to live to come back next year. I'm still getting blooms from the Verbena bonariensis, and I'm letting that one go to seed too. I like it, and I'd like to see more of it come up throughout the garden. I'll move down the way a little bit. Right now, the annuals that I put in here, we just have a little Alyssium blooming, but we may get some more blooms on the other plants, especially if we keep them deadheaded, as the weather cools down a little bit. This year I grew from seed several butterfly bushes, or butterfly weeds. Butterfly bush is a tall bush that attracts butterflies, but the butterfly weed not only attracts them to its bright orange blooms, which this one is finished, it's now putting on seed pods. And I will let those mature and save the seeds of those. This is a host plant for the monarch caterpillars, and it must be working because we've had monarchs flirting around here pretty much all afternoon, and we may still see a couple fly through. Monarchs only consume milkweed, the native milkweed, swamp milkweed, and this butterfly weed, which is in the milkweed family. It's a little better behaved than the one you see out in the fields, so it's a nice one for the gardens. Plus it has pretty orange blooms, which have since gone by, but it makes these seed pods. Now, if you happen to see seed pods like this on a vine, it's probably a plant called black swallowwort. And black swallowwort is an invasive plant that is good to get rid of. It's hard to get rid of. You need to keep cutting it back or digging it out by its roots and getting rid of them with the trash. Preferably after you've set it in the sun in a garbage bag to cook the roots so that they won't re-sprout. Black swallowwort is, as I said, a non-native. It's a vine which can cover things. And the problem with it is a distant relative of the milkweed plant. Monarch butterflies will lay eggs on it, but the caterpillars cannot consume the leaves of the black swallowwort and hence die. They try to eat it and it kills them, the toxins in it. So you need to get rid of that and plant the things the monarch caterpillars can eat. And then you will hopefully have lovely butterflies in your garden. I won't be fertilizing or doing anything much with roses this fall. I'll just enjoy the late blooms, and we will get a few. This is already budded. Some of the best roses are in the late summer when all the insects that normally plague them are gone. Annuals are now also showing up. This is a celosa, and it's adding some bright color. And again, on my garden journal, I will note that it seems to be very happy here, and perhaps put in a few more of them next year to enjoy the color right on through the fall season. Sedums are also popular now, and not only are they popular with people because they add a lot of color to the fall garden, they're popular with the bees. This one has quite a few honeybees on it right now. And these blooms are pink now. They will turn a dark red as the season progresses. We're still getting a few blooms of phlox and a few blooms of salvia, but things are starting to quiet down. Salvia black and blue is starting to come into its own. And I have my hummingbird feeder here next to the butterfly bush, which now has a black swallowtail on it. This has just been a way station for all kinds of butterflies this last few weeks. A black swallowtail today, and couple of monarchs earlier, yellow tiger swallowtails. It's really been quite good to have a butterfly bush here. However, it's not a host plant for any of the butterflies. Their caterpillars do not consume it. It's strictly a nectar plant. This is a hummingbird feeder, and it too has been busy, but the hummingbirds will soon be headed south. So I will be taking down the hummingbird feeder. I'll give it another couple weeks, but I haven't seen a hummingbird for a few days now, so they may well be on their way south. I'll, as I said, give it another week or so, and if I don't see any more hummingbirds, we'll probably take it in, clean it up, and put it away for the winter. A new plant that I tried this year is Digiplexus, and this is an annual. It's a perennial in some areas, but it's really quite beautiful right now. I'm going to try digging it up and taking it inside, perhaps doing a few cuttings from it. I really like it, and we'll try to keep it going for another season. Since it is a perennial in zones 9 and 10, which would be way south of here, I'm hoping that I can keep it alive in a real sunny window and put it out again next spring. These are chrysanthemums that are perennial. I started them in the spring probably 5 years ago. I've divided them several times, and if you've watched my show throughout the season, I've also pinched them back so that they will have lots of blooms and not be as tall. If I hadn't pinched them back, they'd be up here and have just a few spindly shoots. But this way, we'll have a pretty full bush of white chrysanthemums as the season goes on. The heliotrope has been blooming beautifully. It's been pretty happy right now. Again, that is an herb that is not an edible herb, but it's more of an herb for fragrance. And it is a tender annual, and it needs to either have cuttings taken or be brought inside for the winter. If I decide to bring it in, I'll be potting that one up soon, and again, putting it in a spot that I know about that's close to the door so that I can get it inside if frost is threatening. Lately, we haven't had a frost for about another month, so we're pretty safe from frost right now. 40 years ago, I remember frost sometimes right after Labor Day, so it seems that we are actually warming a bit. More phlox and more sedum over in this area. The pineapple lilies are doing their thing. They're blooming nicely. This pot of pineapple lilies does need to be divided, and I'll probably save it over the winter. I put that into a cool room and just let it brown off, and then in the spring bring it out again. Black-eyed Susans now add some color in this section of the garden, along with the white mums. Again, the one white chrysanthemum has found its way into several spots in the garden. And we have more grass over here. Asters will soon be out. They'll add some color. These are purple asters, and I also have some pink asters in the other section of the garden. This is a grass called Cheyenne Sky, and it's starting to take on its fall tones, which are quite red. And this one needs dividing. It's gotten a little too big and it's spreading out a little bit too far. So that's on the list for next spring, is to divide this plant. Underneath it, I have a smaller sedum that blooms in pink. But the way this is spread, even though it's in an enclosure, you can hardly see the lovely little pink sedum underneath with its pink blooms that kind of mirror the color of the grass. So there are a few things to do in the perennial garden, mainly starting to get ready for winter and enjoying what we have. Now let's head over to the vegetable garden and see what needs to be done there. Still plenty going on in the vegetable garden, and I always plant some flowers in the vegetable garden as well. Some of them are edible and some of them are just because I like them. Right now, what I need to do is harvest the coriander seeds. Cilantro goes to seed, and it's kind of a dual-purpose plant. You can eat the cilantro. It's good in Chinese and Mexican recipes, and we tend to like it. Some people find it tastes soapy, and they find it very disagreeable, but those who like it enjoy it in those dishes, and those who don't avoid it like the plague. But when the cilantro goes to seed, the seeds are coriander, which is a spice. The cilantro is an herb, but the coriander seeds are a spice, and they can be ground, and they're used in a number of recipes, pickles and breads and other recipes. The seeds are ground and used in those. So now is the time to pick those. And I'll be picking the seeds just off the top of the plants. Plenty of them will continue to go to seed here in the garden, and we'll have plenty of coriander and cilantro for next year. But when they turn brown, it's time to pick all the seeds that you wish to harvest for a little of the coriander. And then you can just pull the plants and add them to the compost or trash if you really don't want any coriander or cilantro coming up in your compost pile, because it will. I still have some scallions. I planted these from seed in the spring. We have the lanceolato kale, which as a frost comes, this is growing nicely in the center. The leaves have gotten kind of shredded by caterpillars, but the center is growing well, and that will be particularly sweet after a frost. It will continue to live on. I have arugula that can be picked for salads, another one we like, and that was the second or third planting. I've lost track. Lots of calendulas. Some of these I planted, some came up from last year's seed. And zinnias. Zinnias are a great cut flower, and I always plant a few of those so that I can have some bouquets inside. We're still getting some lettuce and beets. This is a perpetual spinach, which is still also available to eat. I'm starting to have my lettuce go to seed, so when that starts to happen, we just pull up the long stems and add those to the compost as well. Lima beans. I have always plant a few lima beans because they're one of my husband's favorites, and we're starting to feel some beans in these pods. They take a lot longer than the green and yellow snap beans or string beans, and we're still getting a few of those. They're starting to put on a lot more blossoms, and we're getting lima beans. So I will come out soon and pick these lima beans as they grow. And you see, you have to open the pods to get those. They take a little more work than the string beans, which we also are still getting the green ones and the yellow ones. Broccoli's putting on side shoots, and these side shoots are just as good as the main shoot. They're just smaller. You don't have to cut up the main head, and I'll be harvesting those possibly even until Thanksgiving because they'll stand through a frost. Some of the things here will, some will not. Broccoli is one of the things that is a very long crop, as is the kale. The kale will continue to be available and to grow right through a frost. We're starting to pick quite a few tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. I try to get out here frequently for the cherry tomatoes. They ripen up fast, and if you get a rainstorm, many of them will tend to split. So I will harvest any that are just turning red and bring them in for a few days if I see a rainstorm on the way. We have a few little cabbages here that are ready to pick. This was a dwarf variety that I put in. So we'll be picking those. I only put in a few of those, about a half a dozen, and that's how many little cabbages we'll be able to take out. On the other side of the tomatoes, I have celery. And this I planted from starts that I purchased, and it's growing really well. Homegrown celery is a completely different thing from the one you buy in the store. The one from the store usually is blanched, but this has a really nice flavor. And I'll be starting to use this celery now because it will not last through a frost. So I need to use it or bring it in and put it in the refrigerator for longer storage. We have some eggplant that's starting to come. I don't have tremendous luck with eggplant, but I do have a few that are on the plants now, and I think they will produce. Another plant I have are shallots, and we can start taking those out now. I planted those from sets, and we can pull those, and you'll notice we have some nice shallots. Those I will put out into the shed, and an earthworm in there too. But I'll put these in the shed in order to ripen off, and then we can keep them inside and hopefully use them most of the winter. They're kind of expensive to buy, but I really like shallots. They're kind of a cross between a green onion and garlic, and they have a nice mild flavor that adds a lot to many dishes. I have some peppers here, including some hot peppers. We'll be using a couple of those in our recipe today. Summer squash, again after the rain. Yesterday they were baby squash. Today they are ready to pick. So you have to really keep an eye on zucchini and summer squash. It can develop before you even know that it's there. It develops really quickly. I'm going to put these down and come over, and last winter we started a number of seeds in milk cartons in the house, in milk jugs actually. We started them in there, but then we promptly put them outside. Those plants grew, and they were mostly perennials. This is a perennial that's called Lychnis, and what I'm going to do, I have some extra pots of it, which I'll probably share with others, or at the Garden Club plant sale, or I may even plant a few here, but I'm not sure where I want it. So I want to keep it over the winter, and how I'm going to do that is to, instead of planting the plants and having to completely dig them up and disrupt their roots, I'm going to bury the pots, bury them pot and all, right in the soil, and put the soil up around the pots. And I'll continue that with the other ones, as well as any other perennials that I divide this fall and really have no place to put them or haven't decided where to put them. And we'll keep these watered. As we do with anything that we have divided this fall, if we divide daylilies or add some other perennials. I usually add my perennials in the spring, but again, if I want to transplant a few things, make sure you keep them watered. Otherwise, they may not make it through the winter. You want to have them put on the maximum root growth and acclimate to their situation before winter comes. Now I'm going to go over to the back of the garden. Last spring I planted the amaryllis that had bloomed in the house in the winter out here for the summer to give it a little summer vacation. We've been keeping it watered and fertilized, and now it's time to dig it up again and let it go dormant. And I'm going to dig these bulbs up with their roots intact and add it to the basket. Some of these are bigger than others. So we'll take this down. I'll dig the rest of them. I think I have 5. And I'll put these in my garden shed in a dry place. And the idea is for them to dry out and the foliage to completely become dry and remove the foliage. And then I can replant the bulb and expect hopefully blooms in about 8 weeks after I've started watering them. I may plant them a little early, but use dry soil and then water them maybe around Thanksgiving and see if we can have some nice blooms by Valentine's Day. Sometimes it works and sometimes they need more than 1 year. Some of the bulbs are larger than others, so the larger bulbs tend to produce the largest of the blooms. You'll notice a plastic bag sitting here in the sun. This contains some noxious weeds, the black swallowwort and some bittersweet. Bittersweet, please don't use it as a decoration. It too is an invasive, at least the Japanese bittersweet is, and that's pretty much all you can find. It is an invasive in this area. It can cover trees, it can kill trees. And once it gets going, it's very hard to eliminate. And one way to kill it before you add it to the trash is to put it in a plastic bag in the garden and let it, what they call solarize. And by that, it means the sun will actually cook it in the plastic bag. It's best to use a black garbage bag if you have a great deal of it. And leave it out for 3 or 4 weeks in the sun, and then add it to the trash. That way it won't be coming up for somebody else someplace else. There are a number of invasive plants, and you really need to be careful about not planting them or encouraging them to grow on your land. And I know bittersweet is a lovely fall decoration. The native bittersweet, and there is such a thing, has been pretty much taken over by the oriental invader, which tends to be a lot more blooms, and it spreads invasively. Again, smothering trees and being very impolite around other plants. And it will spread from seeds that you bring on the decorative wreaths and other things using it. So if you want to use bittersweet, buy the plastic kind. That's my best advice. That way it won't spread. The window boxes have had it for the season. I've removed the petunias and other plants that were in here, the verbena. They just, you know, they run out after a while. I do like to keep my solar lights in. They kind of add a little light at night. They work really well in my window boxes. But I need to refresh these, so I did get some fall plants. And I'm going to start with a ornamental pepper. I really don't want this down where the dog can eat it, so I will add it. And you'll notice it needs to have its roots spread a little. These window boxes are pretty shallow, so I have to move some of the dirt aside to get this in here. They're not going to be here long. I may be able to bring these inside later, but then again, I bought them just to be color for a little while. The other thing I can add is one of these fall blooming cabbages or kale. And this has grown so well that it has a lot of roots on the bottom. And I'll just remove those before tipping it out of the pot. And you'll notice it's pretty root bound too. So I may want to cut some of those roots. And I can just cut off the bottom of the plant actually and give it some place to go. Also, I have a shallow pot, so that'll work well in its favor. And this is a red flowering kale. And I'll just take the bottom right off. And sink that in next to the pepper. I thought the purple tones went with these purple and yellow peppers pretty well. And we'll put the solar light back in between them. And this is a short sedum. It's very similar to the one I have in the garden already. And I'm going to put that one down at this end. Again, it's doing a few plants that aren't geraniums, or aren't chrysanthemums, or geraniums for that matter. It gives it a little extra look. This is in full sun most of the day, so I want something that can take that full sun. I put in a cutting of this purple plant that I have in my other planter, and that kind of matches the colors too. And the next thing I have are a few pansies. Pansies are available in the fall as well as the spring. And if you're really lucky and have them in a good location, they can make it for another season and bloom in the spring too. This one has 3 plants in the pot, so I will use those. And again, following the purple and yellow coloration, we'll pop one right in here. Now I think I need to add a little more soil, which I can do later. But you get the idea that we have improved this. This is alyssum, which I planted, and this one is a ground cover, which I have at the other end. The alyssum was planted earlier, and I've just been trimming off the brown shoots on that one, and it will continue to bloom, and maybe even increase its bloom as fall wears on. So we can cut off any of the dead. But it gives us something to kind of hang over the edge. You could also use ivy, which will actually root right in the pot if you keep it moist. And that's the next thing that you need to do, and that's to keep it watered. None of these are going to make it very far unless you come out and water it. And because it's a shallow container, they take watering almost every day. Now I have another one over this direction. There's another pot that I need to do a little work with to get it ready for fall. And I'm going to actually remove a couple plants that are still growing. And that would be the Nicotianas that are in here, white and red. And I can add these to some of the other planters. that I have. I also have a geranium in here that never did too well, but I'm going to pot that one up and bring it inside and see if we can keep it going through the winter and put it in a little better spot next year. I'm going to take out all of the red and some of the white, and we'll add a couple other plants. I'm going to leave the Salvia Wendy's Wish. This is an annual salvia that's been blooming and blooming and blooming with the pink blooms. So I really wanted something that would complement that. And I chose another one of the ornamental kales. And again, this one will just loosen those heavily bound roots a bit by removing the very bottom of the plant. This one will probably continue to grow as I put it in the pot. And then I did get a white chrysanthemum, a small white one. I do not expect this one to make it through the winter. Again, you'll see it's fairly pot bound, so we want to loosen the bottom of that at least a little bit. To see if we can get some of those roots to extend down and out instead of around and around. And we'll set this one right in here. And again, I'll probably need to bring in a little extra soil, perhaps some compost, and we'll have a white flowering plant in there. We'll let the rest of the nasturtium that's here and another one of the nicotiana bloom out the other side. But we've neatened it up a little bit for fall. This one can be deadheaded. And the Wendy's Wish should keep blooming and still look okay with the flowering cabbage and the chrysanthemum. I'm back in the shade garden near my garden shed, and fall is again coming, and starting to think about what's coming in and what isn't coming in this year. Certainly the begonias will come in probably earlier than some of the other things because they're the most tender. Impatiens will stay out. We'll replant those next year. No sense bringing those in. They only bring in insects and other problems if you bring them in the house. So we'll just save seeds, continue saving seeds, and leave the plants out until after a frost and then just compost the rest. Some of the water plants will stay. The iris that's in there can stay, but the other grasses that are in will come out, and we'll dig the canna lily, and that will come in for the winter to be replanted next spring. I have an elephant ear and a ginger plant, and those are tender and they will come in. They can wait a little longer. Again, the begonia will be the first to come in slowly. Now, as I bring the plants in, I will make sure that I give them a spray of some neem oil or other organic insecticide, and make sure they don't bring anything inside that would be all over everything in the house. We still have a few things that are going to bloom or are in bloom. Very few hosta. The hosta are starting to look pretty ragged, and again, they will be trimmed down as they become really unsightly. The later hosta are in bloom. Hosta will bloom all the way from about early July on through September. So it's a nice plant to have, and having a variety gives you bloom all through the season. I have a white turtle head here that will be in bloom. It has nice buds. I have a pink one up in the other part of the shade garden. They're a perennial, and they are a native perennial, which is nice to plant. These plants, I've taken cuttings of all of the coleus, and I also have a little plant, couple little plants in here that I may try to take in. This coleus has been destroyed pretty much by slugs, and I can actually start taking that out. And again, the impatient will stay here and form seeds. So it's a matter of deciding what to take in, what to leave out. Last time I sanded down a gourd to make a birdhouse, and I have worked on finishing this birdhouse. It's not quite done. I need to decorate it a little. And to do that, I'm looking at my tools here. I'll use a pencil to draw a design. I'll probably draw a vine design and kind of just draw it on the paint. I did, after I sanded it, I cut a hole in it and put a hanger on it. And now I will mark out a vine that kind of circles around it. And then I'll put some leaves on it, and I'll use just acrylic paint. When I'm finished with it, I'll give it a spray of acrylic, outdoor acrylic, and that will preserve it, and then I'll save it for next spring, and we can put it out and hope for wrens to build a nest in it, or some other bird. Cutting the hole is not difficult. The first ones that I did, I thought it was going to be a big problem. And then I realized this is another one that needs to be sanded and painted, but it's very easy to cut a hole because you can just puncture the gourd with an ice pick or another sharp nail. And the same for the hanger. You can just run an ice pick right through it and then run a wire through it. After that, it's a matter of just using a small knife to cut your round hole. The next thing you have to do after you cut the hole is carefully reach in and take out all the old seeds that are in there. And that probably is the thing that takes the longest, is getting the old seeds out. And you can feel them in there, and if you just run the knife in there, it loosens them up, and you can shake them out. Now these have been sitting in the house all winter, last winter, so I wouldn't expect the seeds to be viable as far as planting them for next year. If you really wanted to plant them for next year, you would have had to remove them right when the gourds were ripe, or just out of the garden. But again, just a knife is all you need. You don't need a fancy saw or a blade to make the hole. And I think 1 1/4 inch is the size that wrens prefer. There are various resources online that will tell you what different birds would like. And again, pulling out the innards is the thing that takes a little time. You can see old seeds and just the supporting structure of the seeds needs to come out before you have a hollow gourd to make a birdhouse. So that's our birdhouse building. You want to continue using your deer spray all season, periodically. It's easy to forget come fall, but some of the shrubs will be consumed by deer this winter if you don't keep it up. You want them to learn that this is not the yard they want to be in, and that they don't want to come and eat things. If you just spray in the spring, they will start coming in again and devouring what they can. And in the winter, they will destroy things like rhododendrons and other shrubs that you really would like to keep. So make sure you keep up with the deer spray. As far as the slugs treatment goes, the slugs have put a lot of holes in the hosta, and I've probably finished using that for the season because the hostas are on their way out, and with the first frost they will just become a mass of fallen leaves, so I won't use any more of that. Now let's go up by the house and do a little fall cleanup there. In the fall, it's good to wash the windows, and I'll probably do that more than once. This is a trick that I learned for my shed windows, but since the camera can't really see the shed windows, I have one whole side of the shed that is transparent, and it gets dirty really fast because it's there on an angle. But the technique that I read about and have used successfully is to use Swiffer to do windows, and it does work. What I have in the bucket is a bucket of warm water with a cup of vinegar and a couple drops of dish soap, just the kind you hand wash dishes. And basically you just wash the windows with the Swiffer, dipping it periodically and let them dry. It works better on a breezy day when it isn't too sunny or hot, but it does work quite well, and it's great for the greenhouse windows because I cannot reach the top of those without a ladder and bending way over. So this really gives me a hand up, and I can do the windows very quickly without too much trouble. So it's a good trick, and I thought I'd share it with you. Now let's go in and do a little cooking. Today we're in the kitchen to do some things with seasonal produce, and we're going to have a little breakfast or brunch, probably more likely a brunch. And I'm going to start out by making some apple muffins, and I'm going to start with 1.5 cups of flour, just regular all-purpose flour. You could use white whole wheat if you preferred, and we're going to add to that 3/4 cup of sugar. You can reduce that if your apples are particularly sweet. Add to it if they're particularly tart. 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And I'm going to just kind of mix that around a little bit. And then to 1/3 cup of cooking oil, I'll add 1/2 cup of buttermilk. And you could substitute regular milk and a little vinegar or lemon juice to sour that milk. It's usually a tablespoon to a cup. And I'll add to that mixture, right in my measuring cup, 2 eggs. I'm going to mix that well. This is often called the muffin method, with good reason, because it's used to make muffins. It's a standard muffin formula. You mix the liquid and dry ingredients separately. We're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla to the wet ingredients. And I'll just put that back in the cupboard. We have that thoroughly mixed. And then I'll add it to my dry ingredients all at once. No gradual stirring to this. Maybe that's why muffins are called quick breads. And then you want to stir it just until the dry ingredients are wet. If you overmix muffins, they will be tough and also have big tunnels in them. And we've got it almost done, and I'll add 1 cup of chopped apple. This is browned a little because I had to do it early, and 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts. And just stir that around slightly. Then we're going to add it to a greased muffin tin. And I'll fill them up fairly full. Now I'll finish this off with a sprinkle of cinnamon sugar on each muffin. Just a little bit. And the cinnamon sugar, I don't buy it, I make it. You just use about 1/4 cup of sugar to a couple teaspoons of cinnamon and mix it around in a jar. And there you have that. These go in the oven for 20 minutes at 350. And we'll set the timer. And go on about making something else. We're going to start with making some salsa. And this uses a lot of seasonal products. These are fresh tomatoes that have been seeded. And to seed the tomatoes, you cut them in half and then cut a slit in each of the little seed compartments from the outside and remove the seeds. This gives you less seeds in your salsa. If you don't mind seeds, you don't have to do it, but I kind of like to take them out. We're going to add 1/2 yellow or green pepper. I happen to have yellow. We have a couple tablespoons of red onion. A very finely minced large clove of garlic. And a very finely minced hot pepper. And I showed you the hot peppers in the garden, and this is one of them that was out there. A little goes a long ways. We'll mix that in. We want to add a teaspoon of cumin, which is a spice often used in Mexican food. A couple shakes of salt. And a 1/4 cup of lime juice. And a 1/2 cup of cilantro. We're on the last call for the cilantro from my garden. The season is pretty much over. It's best served fresh. You can freeze a little of it, but it's the best when it's fresh. So we're going to mix that into our salsa. Mix it all together. And this is a nice fresh tomato salsa. And we're going to serve it with our breakfast dish or brunch dish. But it would also be very good with tortilla chips. So we'll put that off to the side and heat up the frying pan with a tablespoon of oil. And I'm going to add a red pepper. This is half a very large one, or you could use one small one. And some sweet onion. You could use scallions if you happen to have them, but you could also use just the sweet onion. And we're going to saute these a little bit to soften them up. In about a tablespoon of olive oil. And while we're doing that, we'll warm 1/2 cup of black beans in a small pan. And we want to saute these for about maybe 5 minutes. Now that our peppers and onions are just about ready to finish, I'm going to whip up 4 eggs with my whisk. And add them to the fry pan with the peppers and the onions. And we're going to scramble those. Give them a quick stir. And then while they're cooking, I'm going to put 2 corn tortillas into the microwave oven. Actually, I would be using 4, but I'm just going to do 1 serving now. For about 30 seconds, just to warm them up. So this is very quick. Our black beans are warming in the pan. They're probably finished. And I'll just stir these eggs around until they're scrambled the way you like them. I like mine fairly well done. And we'll put the 2 tortillas on a plate and add a serving of the eggs. I have a little cilantro on the plate as a garnish. But we're also going to add some black beans to this. And we serve it with the salsa, the fresh salsa. And I'm going to also add avocado. And avocado is best sliced fresh. And if you have one that's ripe and ready to go, it's pretty easy to do. You can just peel it right off. The skin should come off in just a few pieces. And we'll slice the avocado on it. And this was called a breakfast taco. I tend to think of a taco as something that's wrapped up. And you could certainly wrap it, but it looks much prettier this way. It has a lot of color, uses a lot of seasonal ingredients as well. Add quite a bit of avocado to that. And then we'll serve it with our apple muffins. And perhaps some melon, which is also in season right now. And we have a very colorful brunch going here with a nice piece of melon and some and we're ready for a nice brunch or late weekend breakfast or even a supper at this point. Now, before we sit down to enjoy our Mexican tacos, these are the garlic scapes that we pickled about 8 weeks ago, and they are now ready to be opened. Remember, we stuck them in the refrigerator for a long time. They were not sealed, so they have to stay in the refrigerator, but they are ready, and we can serve those anytime. I don't think they really go with this meal. But I also wanted to show you another way to preserve tomatoes. And I've dried some of these. These are the yellow pear tomatoes. And they started out like this. And I cut them in halves and put them on the plate and brushed them with olive oil. Put them in a 200-degree oven all night. They are now pretty much dried. They're a little bit soft. I brushed them with olive oil before I put them in. I'm going to put them into a freezer bag and stick them in the freezer. I can use these all winter, cut up on pizza or in other things that I might want to make with a little bit of tomato flavor. These have very strong tomato flavor. They're really good on pizza or in with pasta. And after I take them out of the freezer, I'll thaw them in a couple tablespoons of olive oil, and they will turn out to be very delicious. If you may cook them a little less, you can use red tomatoes. The idea is to cook them long and low temperature for a longer length. I've added a late season bouquet to this display. I'm Liz Davey. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. Join us again next time when we'll be out in the garden and back in the kitchen.